Well, hello there, my young readers, and welcome back to the channel. And if you're new, welcome. We've got an awesome lineup for you in this video. Not one, not two, but three stories being brought to you by none other than Thomas and Friends. Right about now, I'd be telling you all to go get your snacks and or your drinks if you didn't already have them, but because these stories are part of the Sleepytime collection series by Thomas and Friends, we can talk a little bit about getting comfortable. Depending on the time of day, you might want to consider putting your pajamas on. It just depends. If this is nap time, go ahead and get comfortable. And if you need it, grab your teddy bear or your doll or both if need be. But this is going to be part one of the series in this collection of Sleepytime stories. So we'll get started. Stay tuned. The name of this story is called Busy Engines, and this is part of the Thomas and Friends Sleepytime collection. Enjoy. It was a special day on Sodor. The railway inspector was coming to inspect Sir Topham Hatt's railway. "Thomas, you should be shunting coal trucks when the inspector arrives," said Sir Topham Hatt. "He wants to see busy engines. It's very important." Thomas went to find some of his engine friends. He wanted to ask them to help shunt trucks. He puffed to Mayron Station. Percy was there waiting for the mail. "Hello, Percy," peeped Thomas. "Will you come and shunt coal trucks with me? The inspector is arriving soon, and he wants to see busy engines." Percy was supposed to deliver the mail, but he did want to help Thomas too. Percy was uncoupled, and away he whooshed. And where did the inspector go first? To Mayron Station. When the inspector arrived to check on things, Percy wasn't there. The inspector was not very pleased. In the meantime, Thomas huffed to the quarry, where Mavis was waiting to pull some slate trucks. "Will you come and shunt coal trucks?" peeped Thomas. "The inspector is due to arrive, and he wants to see busy engines." Mavis had a lot to do, but she decided to help Thomas too. And where do you think the inspector went next? The quarry. When he arrived at the quarry, Mavis wasn't there. Uh-oh. The inspector was not pleased at all. Thomas was chuffing cheerily down the docks. Percy and Mavis had already shunted a long line of coal trucks. They knew that the inspector would be so pleased. Then Thomas heard Gordon's whistle go peep as he delivered the inspector to the docks. "We must look busy," Thomas said urgently. So Percy shoved and Mavis shunted, and the coal trucks biffed and bashed together. And then, oh no, coal dust flew down Gordon's funnel. It made him sputter and cough. The dust flew back out of his funnel and landed everywhere. Sir Topham Hatt was very cross. "What's going on?" he shouted. "Thomas, what have you been up to? The inspector is not pleased at all." Poor Thomas, he felt terrible. Thomas knew he had to make things right. He heaved and hauled Gordon to the steamworks for repair. Soon, Gordon's funnel was fixed and his firebox was roaring away again. Thomas steamed back to the docks. He was ready to be a very busy engine. He shunted and shoved until all the trucks were in their right places. He was so busy that he didn't notice that Sir Topham Hatt and the inspector were watching him. "You've been a very busy engine," the inspector said to Thomas. "Next time, Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt, "remember that you can be a busy engine all by yourself, and a really useful one too." "Oh, I will, sir," Thomas replied. "I certainly will." And he beamed from buffer to buffer. Well, that ends our first story. But stay tuned, my young readers, because we've got more Thomas on the way. Stay tuned. The name of this story is called The Lost Puff. One day, Sir Topham Hatt told the engines that there was some damaged track at Knapfoot Bend. All the engines on the railway listened carefully, except Paxton and Thomas, who were laughing at the antics of a duck that was waddling toward the sheds. "May I remind you two, in particular, not to be silly," Sir Topham Hatt said sternly. "You must pay attention. I don't want any accidents." A while later, Paxton arrived at the broken track. As he rode over it, it rattled his radiator, making him laugh. "That was fun," he said, grinning. When Thomas arrived at the bend, Paxton got him to try it too. "Woohoo!" Thomas said with a giggle as he bounced along. "Get up some speed and go over it really fast," Paxton suggested. So Thomas raced backward around the corner and, oops, bashed right into Toby, who was filling up at the water tower. Water splashed all over, and all over Thomas. It put out his firebox. "Oh no," Paxton cried. "Sir Topham Hatt told me not to be silly, but I was, and now there's been an accident." Paxton rode away quickly and quietly to deliver his trucks to the shunting yard. When Toby arrived at the shunting yards, Paxton heard him tell Stafford that Thomas had lost his puff. That sounded serious. Paxton decided that he would go and look for Thomas's lost puff. He would find it. He raced along, looking all around, but he didn't really know what to look for. Then he saw a puff of steam and raced after it. But it turned out to be just Gordon pulling the express. Next, Paxton spotted a fluffy white cloud in the sky. "That must be Thomas's missing puff," he said as he hurried toward it. Paxton followed the cloud all the way to Ulfstead Castle, where he met Stephen. "Hello, Paxton," Stephen said. "What are you doing here?" "Thomas has lost his puff, and I thought that might be it," Paxton told him, looking up at the cloud. "Up there? That's just a cloud," Stephen replied. Paxton felt rather silly. He sped away as fast as his wheels could carry him. Paxton realized he didn't know anything about a steam engine's puff because he was a diesel engine. But he knew someone who did know about steam engines, Victor, whose job it was to repair them. Paxton hurried to the steamworks to find Victor. He asked Victor if he had a spare puff for Thomas. This made Toby, who was at the steamworks for repairs, laugh. "Puff just means steam," Toby explained to Paxton. "When Thomas bumped into me, his firebox got wet. Steamies can't make puffs when their fire goes out." Once again, Paxton felt silly, but He cheered up again when he realized that Thomas would be fine, just as soon as his firebox dried out. As Paxton sped back to the water tower, he heard a cheerful peep, and there was Thomas, puffing around the corner. "You're okay," Paxton said happily. "Yes, I found my lost puff," Thomas joked. "At least I learned something today," Paxton said, smiling. "That puff just means steam?" asked Thomas. "Yes," Paxton said, still smiling, "but also that when Sir Topham Hatt tells me not to be silly, I shouldn't be silly." And Thomas wholeheartedly agreed. Well, that ends another story. I hope you guys enjoyed it because we've got another story for you guys. So sit back, relax, and stay tuned. The name of this story is called Thomas and Scruff. Thomas's friend Whiff worked at the waste dump on the Island of Sodor, biffing and bashing trucks full of trash. Keeping Sodor clean and tidy was a lot of work. It was a very important job. One day, Thomas went to tell Whiff some good news. "I'm fetching a helper for you," he peeped. Whiff was very excited to hear this. Thomas steamed to the docks to meet Scruff, the scruncher. "Hello, Thomas," Scruff chuffed. "I can't wait to scrunch some trash." Thomas liked Scruff. He thought he was very nice, but he also thought Scruff looked very dirty. An idea flew into Thomas's funnel. He asked Scruff to wait right there for a special surprise. Then Thomas chuffed away to gather some brushes and buckets and soaps and sponges. Back at the docks, Thomas showed Scruff his surprise. "With a splish and a splash, you'll be clean in a dash," he peeped. But Scruff was scared. He had never seen soap or brushes before. He did not like this surprise at all. With a clickety-clack, Scruff whooshed away and hid in a siding. Thomas realized that Scruff was scared of being washed. "Please come back, Scruff," he called. But Scruff refused to come out of hiding. Thomas asked Gordon to see if he could get Scruff out of the siding. "Scruff, would you like to see my express carriages?" Gordon asked. "They're green and very grand." But Scruff didn't want to see the carriages. He stayed right where he was. Next, Thomas asked Henry to try. "Scruff, would you like to help fetch my special coal?" Henry huffed. "It makes me fast and fearless." But Scruff didn't want to fetch any coal. He was not going to come out of that siding. After that, Thomas asked Percy to give it a try. "Scruff, would you like to pull my mail trucks?" Percy peeped. "They're packed with parcels." But Scruff didn't want to pull the mail trucks. He just stayed put. Finally, Thomas remembered the one thing that Scruff did want to do. "Scruff, would you like to go and scrunch some trash at the waste dump?" Thomas asked. "You don't have to be clean for that." When he heard what Thomas said, Scruff wheeshed quickly out of the siding. He was ready to go. Thomas and Scruff steamed off to the waste dump, where Whiff was waiting for them. Scruff looked around at the dirty dump. "I'm gonna like it here," he whistled. "There isn't any soap and no water and brushes either." He laughed happily, and Thomas and Whiff laughed with him. Well, that ends all the stories for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And this is To Be Continued. See you next week.